Welcome back, dear students, and the second part of the case history, and in other words, the beginning, the introductory part of the case history is the inquiry, or in other words, the interrogation. So, generally, what is interrogation? It's all this information you gather from a patient by interrogating. It means via conversation. So, in other words, that's what you ask the patient and he gives you answers. Or otherwise, in other words, that's the talk with the patient. So, this part, number one part of the patient, is the results of your conversation with the patient. That's what you get from asking questions and receiving answers to those questions. So let's begin. The first part with which you begin the inquiry, the conversation, is asking the name. When you will work in real life, in real field, you will ask, of course, the patient's ID, the passport or whatever, but as we are writing the academic history of a patient's case, we're going to fill it by ourselves. So, in your particular case, you have to figure out the name, age, passport data, because that's accidental information. You can't really know in one or another case which patient exactly are you going to meet. So it always stays a bit unclear for you. So let's use this degree of freedom and pick up our own name. In my case, as we are writing the example of academic case history, I'm going to write a just figure out name. So let it be, as we've talked previously, John Smith. Next, age. Let it be, although we are learning not child surgery, we are talking about some adult person, let it be some, I don't know, really adult, but not very senior age for appendicitis. Let it be like 39 years. Next, gender. In my days, when I was writing a case history, it was not really such a big deal, but I think you are all aware that we're living in a modern world where gender is, it happens to be quite a great issue in a lot of cases. So, what I mean, the person you're dealing with, for example, he can look like a female, but if he's a transgender, I mean, if he considers himself as a female or a male, he may look like a female, but he considers himself as a male. So that's really a point of discussion here. I want you to know that. So in modern world, especially if you're going to work in USA or in Europe, that can be a real great issue. I know cases when a doctor had sues in courts for wrong identification of a person's gender. So you have to ask this question: what is your gender? Not, it doesn't matter if he looks like a male or female. You have to you still if you live in a politically correct, politically correct society, you have to ask his gender. So let's imagine that this is a cisgender person, and his name is John Smith, and his gender is male. Next, racial status. Why is this field important? Because usually, if we are talking about some adult person, those relatives who are going to look after this person after your surgery, or those who are going to sign the papers about permission to perform him surgery or diagnostic procedure. Very less frequently it's going to be his parents or brothers and sisters. It's going to be his wife, husband, brothers, very close friend who is so familiar like a brother, or so on. So that's a very important field. This field, from this field you will gather information exactly who will look after this patient, but we'll discuss it later in more details. So, for example, let us imagine that this male person, 39 years old, he is married. It means that he has a wife. Next, occupation. Why is occupation so important? Well, because, for example, if you are dealing with a narcotic problem, some criminal problem, social problem, you will have to fill in some information for the police, for someone who will inform his occupation, who will inform his the executive of his job for that he has this or he has other disease. This is one aspect. Second aspect, this person may ask you for a documentation that he is sick. For example, this documentation will give him opportunity to receive some extra money on his place of occupation. That's why you have to correctly fill in his name, the name of the job he is working, and his occupation. So, for example, let us imagine that this person works as a manager. He works as a manager at Ernst and Young Consulting Agency. Next, home address. This field may be of crucial importance if you are dealing with infectious disease. If you as a doctor, you must be aware of the epidemic control, you must be aware of those who contacted this patient who underwent some epidemic disease, and you need to inform the authorities where this person lives, and so they could make a notice who he contacted with. So all those persons which were in contact with your patient, they could undergo some epidemiologic assay. That is why, for example, let us try that he lives in London. He lives on, I don't know, King Henry the 7th Road, House 5, Apartment 112. Next, date of admission. That's also a very important field, because from the date of his admission, a calculation to the medical help will count on. For example, if we're talking about acute surgical pathology like acute appendicitis, it will mean that surgery throughout 24 hours from initial diagnosis will count from exact date and time when this patient was admitted. So let it be, I don't know, if we're talking about today, let it be 24th April 2020, and time, well, right now it's 22.50, so that's the time when this patient was admitted to your hospital, when you began his physical examination, and to be more precise, the interrogation. That's when you began it. Next, so that is the completed passport part, the patient's ID, the information, the personal information which completes the patient's passport data, by which he further can be identified. Next aspect which we proceed is the complaints. So we're going to talk about the complaints of the patient.